One aspect of naval warfare at which the Americans proved especially adept was commerce raiding. Not only did it strike at the British economy and thereby weaken public resolve, but it offered practitioners the possibility of making a fortune since the law of the sea held that captured ships and their cargoes became the property of the captors. Continental Navy ships seized merchant ships whenever they could, but the most effective commerce raiders during the Revolutionary War were scores of privately owned vessels known as privateers.
With no home port, pirates began to range far and wide. From the 1690s onward, no corner of the globe, no trade route was totally guaranteed.
Though often called pirates in the British press, privateers held government-issued letters of marque, which were quite literally licenses to steal. Obtaining a letter of marque was relatively easy, though records are incomplete. Somewhere between 1,700 and 2,000 American shipowners applied to Congress for one, though only about 800 American privateers actually got to sea. They range in size from tiny vessels hardly bigger than a ship's longboat to ship-rigged vessels with 20 guns or more. Armed merchant ships obtained a letter of marque opportunistically hoping to meet a weaker British vessel. Others were dedicated privateers with oversized crews whose principal function was to seek out and attack British shipping. Before the war was over, American privateers captured an estimated 600 British merchant ships and had a significant impact on the British economy, which contributed to British war wariness. Privateering provided a means for a government to enlist private enterprise in maritime warfare. The goal was to seize enemy merchantmen and their cargoes and thereby to damage the enemy's economy and drive up insurance rates until merchants pressured their government to make peace. A legal system had developed by the mid-17th century under which a government could issue a letter of marque to investors who would obtain, arm, and fit out a ship to attack enemy vessels during wartime. Regulations required that the capture of a vessel be reviewed by a prize court, and if the captured ship was proved to be enemy-owned or carrying enemy-owned cargo, that the ship and its cargo be sold at auction. The government that issued the letter of marque would receive a portion of the proceeds from the sale, and the rest would be divided between the investors, officers, and crew of the privateer that made the capture. A vessel engaged in privateering was itself referred to as a privateer, defined by an 18th century maritime dictionary as a privately owned ship sent in wartime. Privateering allowed governments to harness private enterprise in service of the state. Both the Continental Congress and state governments commissioned privateers, with those of maritime New England leading the way in 1775. The commerce raiders were active along the Atlantic seaboard, in the Caribbean, and around the British Isles. Evidence is fragmentary, with estimates for continental commissions along varying from 1697 to 1809. Those for Massachusetts ranging from 307 to 999. Those for Pennsylvania from 83 to 448, and so on. The number of commissions issued by continental authorities rose steadily from 1776 to a peak in 1781, then declined in 1782 and 1783. All told, American privateers seized at least 600 and possibly as many as 2,000 prizes, and insurance rates rose 30% for ships sailing in convoys and 50% for ships sailing alone. Whatever the correct totals, the number of privateers was far greater than the fewer than 75 ships of the Continental Navy, and the privateers inflicted substantially more damage on British shipping. However, the Continental Navy was America's force at sea, a symbol of nationhood, and charged with wider responsibilities than the commerce raiding engaged in by privateers. Armed with letters of marque and reprisal, audacious crews set to sea in fast and lightly armed vessels with the sole intention of capturing merchant vessels.
Other than increasing your sail area, it's another way of increasing your speed.
A sail is like an airplane wing, really. Only a few modifications and you're overtaking a lumbering merchantman or skipping away from the Royal Navy. Speed was survival.
Because the ship would want to be in a good state itself.
People like to equate these early ships with space capsules. But when these ships left, they literally were entirely on their own.
Chip Reynolds has skippered replica galleons and knows firsthand the importance of navigation and the navigational uncertainties faced by early mariners.
It would be used by sighting celestial objects, the sun, stars.
To sail the Atlantic safely, mariners would take sightings of the elevation of the sun each day, allowing them to follow a single line of latitude all the way across. These waters were uncharted, and so after weeks, sometimes months of sailing, they faced another dragon, the shoals and reefs that protect the shore.
The lead line was really one of the most critical pieces of navigational equipment to transatlantic crossings. Then they can read the depth right off the line.
Even in calm seas and on sandy bottoms, a ship will soon break up. In wild seas, it can break up in minutes.
If they ended up on a sandbank, or if
They came to Port Royal because the British knew that for Spain, piracy was not just some swashbuckling inconvenience. It struck at the very idea of a colony, its umbilical cord. At heart, what made colonies work was maritime commerce. If a colony was to be any good at all, it had to be good for the mother country, and that meant a steady stream of goods and profits crossing the Atlantic. Not for nothing was British Jamaica smack in the middle of the Spanish Lake. Port Royal officials were said to be easy touches for letters of marque, and almost any reprobate with a stolen ship could get one. Anything bad for Spain was good for England.
Privateering was an ideal start-up trade for a new colony. Though the islanders gained security and the buccaneers gained access to what was the best port and the best market for prize goods in the Caribbean.
What happens is really quite amazing, and yet still becomes the launching port.